Growing up with a family full of musicians, Lukas Nelson was basically raised on stage. Lukas started playing guitar in his dad Willie Nelson's band when he was just 11 years old. In those early days, he spent all of his time practicing and made a point of earning his stripes instead of just coasting on his dad's success. That hard work's paid off. In 2008, Lukas formed his acclaimed band Promise of the Real, who've also spent the last 6 years as Neil Young's touring band. In 2017, Lukas and the band were cast in A Star Is Born as Bradley Cooper's backing band. Cooper learned how to embody a rock star on stage through working with Lukas, who also wrote the opening riff for Shallow and co-wrote some other songs on the soundtrack sung by Cooper and Lady Gaga. On today's episode, Lukas Nelson sings some songs from his latest album, A Few Stars Apart. He also talks to Bruce Headlam about the very relatable experience of quarantining with his parents, and talks about how the first song he ever wrote saved him from getting evicted from an apartment after leaving college. This is Broken Record, liner notes for the digital age. I'm Justin Richmond. Here's Bruce Headlam and Lukas Nelson.
So thank you so much for doing this. You've got this new album, A Few Stars Apart, with your band Promise of the Real. Can you just start by telling me a bit about this album?
Yes, the record was recorded at RCA Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a historic place. Elvis and my father and so many others have recorded there. You can feel that history when you go in the building. Dave Cobb was the producer on our record, and he has produced many fantastic artists, including Chris Stapleton, Brandi Carlile, and he's just a really cool guy. And was really happy to work with him because he tends to work the way we like to work, which is sort of analog, live in the studio, a little bit old school, you might say, but he can produce a fresh sound with that process. So we were really happy to be with him.
Was this record, was it written while you were in lockdown for COVID?
Yeah, I mean, we looked through a bunch of the songs that I had written in the last few years, and a good portion of the songs we picked to be on this record were written during quarantine.
Okay, now you're from a great musical family. Your father, Willie, your aunt has been his piano player for a long time. You've got other musicians in your family. Were you able to see them at all during quarantine?
I was with my mother and father during the beginning, the first 6 months of quarantine, which was great. It was really nice to be able to be with them. One of the greatest pains in my life before the pandemic was the fact that my father and I had separate schedules, and so him being in his later years, I want to spend as much time with him as I can, and my work was taking me away from him, which, even though I knew that he was proud and happy that I'm out doing my own thing and on the road, I felt pained not to be with him as much as possible. And so when the pandemic hit, we just happened to be in the same place, and I couldn't leave anywhere anyway. So we got quarantined together, and it was the greatest 5 or 6 months I'd ever spent with them.
Now, I mean, most people, I've been away from my family. Your father, as you mentioned, he's, I think, 88 now. Mm. You did a very lovely version online of Hello in There when John Prine first got sick. And of course, very sadly, he died of COVID. Yeah. Was your family okay through all this?
Well, yes. I mean, we were relatively fine. Absolutely. I think that, when you look at how many people were suffering, I mean, we were just sitting up on a hill in Austin, with horses and eating food together and having family dinners and, things that we hadn't done in years. And so I suppose we were very grateful. I mean, there were challenges, especially challenges in living together after so long. Some childhood things came up and there's a famous quote, and I can't remember who said it. It could have been Ram Dass or Rinpoche, one of these famous Buddhist monks. They say, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your parents. and I can't stress enough. A lot of us, I was having a conversation the other day, a lot of us really feel like as adults, we've sort of become, well, hopefully those of us that feel this way feel that we've become the most peaceful version of ourselves. And, our ability to let things slide, at least for me, I feel like in my entire life, the most challenging experiences have been when I've been forced to spend all that time with the people who've been able to trigger the darkest parts of my personality. And so it really is a great lesson and test in mastering oneself when you're spending time with people who know how to press your buttons and who know how to press their buttons. And so to not say the wrong thing that will set them off, and I don't know anybody who hasn't experienced that even at very enlightened levels. I think that we're all in that same boat together. Even the Dalai Lama probably gets annoyed at some point, but then he's got the tools to not let that show or not let that affect how he responds. The difference between reacting to something and then responding is that one is sort of unconscious reaction and the other is conscious response. And so that lesson has been great, and I think I've learned how to do that a lot better these days.
I have to ask, what would trigger your family when you're at home? What would you do to trigger your family?
Oh my goodness! Oh, there's so many triggers that we have. We're all flawed human beings. We've got these cracks in us that. But they remind me of the cracks in the bowls in Japan where they filled the cracks up with gold, because there is no imperfection really. It's all perfect. But, we have tempers. I mean, the Nelson family has never been accused of being impassionate. We are very passionate people. We have strong opinions about things, and we have a difficulty not expressing those opinions.
I'll come at the question one other way.
Okay. All right.
And it reminds me, you're in Texas where I guess trigger should be that should be the name of a horse, not something people do to each other.
Trigger's the name of my dad's guitar.
Oh, that's right, it is. I've completely forgotten that. All right. I am wondering, and it can, especially if it was in a musical opinion.
Oh, no. No, none of that. No.
You guys don't argue about music?
We don't argue about music. And I don't really argue much. It's oftentimes small things like, when you're stuck, in a room together and, maybe someone feels unappreciated for the work they've been doing or pulling their weight in the family, and then, somebody says something and it triggers something else. But listen, all of these things are universal. They're not unique to my family.
No, I know, because you're describing my family.
Yeah, exactly. We may have different views. I don't like to watch the news. Then they like to have that news on 24/7. So for me, I don't like to, walk into a room and I'm just like, boom, right there. It's in my face, all these headlines. And, and for me, I just, I prefer to get my information very quickly. I get notifications on my phone. I see the general headlines and I turn it off. But, for some reason, that generation, my father's generation, my parents' generation, they love to just have the news on. And 24/7. I wrote a song called Turn Off the News and Build a Garden. And that was, so, we have differences in there and that's okay. It's their house. At that point, I was staying at their house. So, I can't complain when it's, on every TV.
Well, despite what you're describing.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that struck me about this album. It's a very, very hopeful album. Togetherness may have been tough at points, but it's very much an album about togetherness. Do you see it that way?
Oh, I do. And after a couple months of rediscovering the tools to live with each other, we'd been gone. We hadn't been with each other. We'd been sort of in and out of contact and talking all the time, but really spending time together. We hadn't done that a lot. And so once we sat down, once we started hanging, and I rediscovered these beautiful people that were my parents. I felt so grateful and hopeful, and it gave me a stronger sense of peace than I ever had, a stronger sense of contentment, of being comfortable in my own skin, of security. Because, you know, the insecurities that you carry with you from the relationship with your parents throughout life are very strong. And if you're lucky enough to be able to sort of confront those insecurities firsthand with the tools that, I mean, I had learned how to do meditation, and I'd learned the tools that you need in order to respond and not react. And so even though I failed many times towards the end of that period of time where I was stuck with them, we were really getting along, and we worked through a lot of stuff, and it was really a necessary time for all of us.
Well, you're giving hope to an entire country that's coming out of COVID. I hope you know that.
Well, listen, what better gift could one hope to give?
Well, you are. One of the gifts on this album is We'll Be All Right, which is the first song. Was that written with anybody in mind?
That was written with everybody in mind. That was written with the whole world in mind. It's a pretty heavy song in some ways because it's, you know, talks about empires falling and understanding that everything's impermanent. But, you know, through it all, through the world, I write a lot about sort of the outside world collapsing, and yet love being what keeps us strong through that. I would say that I'm a classic liberal, a classical liberal, not a neoliberal, but a classical liberal, in which I really believe in the strength of individuals, knowing that things around will be at times very, very, very difficult. And so giving people the tools, instead of saying, let's eradicate bullying from the world, maybe instead say, let's learn how to not let bullying affect you. You know, let's learn how to take people's words and let them slide off and not really let them affect you. You know, build the strength from within so that we learn to be strong people instead of relying on or trying to just say, well, let's eradicate negativity, or let's take this bad thing and because you're never going to do that. There's always going to be a new thing that pops up. So rather than campaigns against the thing itself, maybe the thing should be learned how to deal with inside. And that's sort of a theme that I think recurs in a lot of my songs.
Your father had a difficult relationship with Nashville when he was a songwriter there.
Sure.
And he returned to Texas. Some of your experiences remind me a bit of Rosanne Cash, whom we've interviewed, whose father also had a difficult time with Nashville.
Sure.
And didn't want to be there. What's it like for you to go to Nashville, which is not just a city, not just a place with great studios and great musicians, but a kind of industry that represents a certain way of thinking about country music?
I think Nashville has changed quite a lot since those times, especially in that there's a lot of quality music coming out of Nashville now, separate from what the radio stuff is, you know, separate from what the new country, you know, that comes out. There's really good stuff coming out of Nashville, but there's great stuff coming all over the place now because we have the internet and we don't need to be in a specific spot really to, you know, there is no hub. But Nashville itself has an energy, and going there, it can help inspire, I think, good music to come. But and the level of musicianship that is condensed into Nashville is incredible. Some of the best musicians in the whole world. It's sort of one of the last places where people really appreciate musical talent in terms of proficiency at an instrument and not like proficiency at, you know, programming.
And speaking of which, you did this whole album on analog. You did it on tape, didn't you?
We did, yes.
Yeah. Did you edit it digitally, but just record it on tape, or?
Well, we didn't do much editing at all. It was all live for the most part. There were hardly any overdubs, I don't think. And it's funny because, you know, people don't really know that. And they don't notice that because everything has been edited that they listen to the most part, for the most part. So a lot of times people think that our music is really slick, when at the same time, it's just that, this band is really, really good. They're really good. And so it sounds like it's been produced and edited or whatever, but it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't. And these guys are just good, and they're good musicians. And so I'm proud of them for that.
Yeah. There's not a lot of auto-tune on your voice, I noticed.
I wish I could sing better and tune, but, I try.
I've heard that you don't like your own voice. Is that true?
It's not that I don't like it. It's just that it's a work in progress, let me just say. I actually like my voice, but I can hit any note. I can hit high notes. I can hit low notes. It's just a different sound, a different timbre. And, but it's getting more character to it as time goes by, as I go through more things in life, and it gets a little more weathered. And so, I'm trying not to judge it yet.
I think your mother said that she thought you'd found your voice on this record.
Yeah.
What do you think she meant?
There's certain songs where I'm actually really happy with the sound of my voice. She said that specifically regarding a song called Throwing Away Your Love, which is sort of a more conversational sort of timbre. It's a lower register of my voice. Mm-hmm. And I like that lower register. That higher register, I couldn't sing that lower when I was younger, but I'm able to sing it now, get a little lower down there.
And this album is more, for people who have followed you, it's a more country album. You and your band you're a kind of very heavy, guitar-driven California-style band, but this one feels a little more Austin to me.
Yeah, I don't know where that California style got thrown into all those articles. I mean, we did the first record was in Austin. We've actually only recorded one record in California, or two records in California. But most of the time, I grew up listening to Austin, Texas musicians and Seattle musicians. There's no bands that I was influenced really from California, unless you include like Buck Owens or the sort of the Bakersfield sound, Merle Haggard, that kind of thing. Or Neil Young, I guess, supposedly, made his real sound down there in California. But we called ourselves cowboy hippie surf rock when we started out. So maybe California was just sort of grandfathered in at that point.
I mentioned you're from this storied musical family. Not only did you grow up in your musical family, you joined the family band pretty early, didn't you?
Yeah, I started playing when I was 13, 14 in the band.
Well, how long had you been playing by that point?
A few years. I really got proficient, at least good enough to hang by the third year I was playing, because I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours playing. I didn't stop. I wanted to be an Olympic athlete when I was a young kid. I wanted to be a swimmer, and I knew what it took, and I wanted to give that same amount of focus and attention and practice to music, to stand out as someone who definitely made their life about music, to stand out as someone who loves music and embodies music and isn't just writing on coattails or something. I feel like I had a little something extra to prove to myself as well as to others, but mostly to myself, that I was okay on my own. And that if my father hadn't been famous, I would still be capable of putting in the effort required and working hard enough to stand and be heard no matter what.
Mm-hmm. What happened to swimming?
Well, I got distracted by music at a certain point. I started putting more into music than I did to swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Music has taken me all over the world. Music has taken me to loves in my life. It's given me confidence. It's given me strength. If there is a God, I think God is music,
Mm-hmm. So when did the songwriting start for you?
When I was 11 years old, I wrote a song called You Were It. And my dad liked it so much, he put it on his record, It Always Will Be, at the time. I was probably about 11 years old when that happened.
So wait a second. You're 11, you start to get royalty checks from one of your dad's albums?
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that
I
right?
have a funny story about that, too, because when I was older, I was living in California. I went to Loyola Marymount University. Briefly, I dropped out, but after I dropped out, I was paying rent at this place in Venice, California, and month to month it was kind of difficult. I was going on the road and making money, but there were times where I was not almost going to make my rent. And I remember one day, the day of the rent came due, and I didn't have the money. I didn't have hardly any money at that point. I'm not sure if anybody realizes, but I never take money from my parents. I just never. I'm just kind of, I don't know. I forced myself to separate from that because it was my own thing. So I couldn't pay the rent, and I was driving down the PCH, and something just came over me. Like, okay, I'm gonna be okay no matter what. I'm just gonna trust, that life is gonna be okay. And I got a call. As soon as I had that thought, I got a call. And it was that I had a package at FedEx. And so I drove to FedEx and I opened up the package, and it was a check from writing that song for exactly what was due for my rent. The exact to the dollar amount. And I said, wow. And at that point on, I just sort of said, you know what? I'm just going to keep trusting.
That is a fantastic story. Tell me about meeting Bradley Cooper and how your work on A Star Is Born came around.
Well, at first I was hired because he saw us at Desert Trip with Neil, and he's a huge Neil fan. Oh. And he hired me to be an authenticity consultant. He wanted to basically he wanted me to let him know what looked authentic on stage and how to be, a rock and roller on stage and what kind of guitars to use. But we ended up singing. I ended up helping him sing, learn to sing. And I ended up being the guitar and the music. And I ended up bringing my band in and then writing a bunch of songs with them and producing. And having brought the band in and we, one of the great experiences was just sitting with him and watching his voice progress, and then having him, really get pretending to play down pretty well. But it was cool seeing our music come off the big screen and hearing my lick, that working with Stephanie, with Gaga was great too. It gave us a lot of validation. I think as musicians, we felt like we could hang with these, pop stars as well as we could hang with, the legends. It was great.
What's it like to write with someone who hasn't? Because he did write some of the songs or co-wrote some of the songs.
Yeah, we wrote Black Eyes together and a couple other ones. Yeah, he has great ideas. He's really musical.
And then Stephanie, Lady Gaga, you didn't have to teach her how to sing.
Didn't have to teach her how to sing. No, she could sing her ass off. But she, it was nice to have the band in there, and she was a great producer. And I'm glad that she chose to keep my version of, the band's version of "Shallow," pretty much, on the record as well. It's a trip to hear your guitar out there when all of these, young kids are singing along to it, and they don't know that Promise of the Real is the band they're singing to,
One of the people you've worked with a lot, and I want to talk about different people in your life that have helped you, but he's a good example of someone who has so much material you're never sure when it's coming out, and that's Neil Young.
Yeah.
You've been his backup band. You've played with him.
Sure.
Can you tell me a bit about how you guys first met and how that all came about?
Well, Neil and I had known each other just peripherally because we did Farm Aid every year. But I was always kind of, I never really spoke to him until maybe I was 16. And I wrote a song called American Dream, which I have to go find that. I don't know where it went, but it was like a farmer's song. And I wrote that song, and then I got the courage to go out and play it for him. and to play it for with my brother, and we went and played it for him, and he was like, "Oh, that's great, sounds good." We were out by the buses at Farm Aid. I remember clear as day. That was the first longer conversation that we had with him, and I don't know. Part of me thinks that maybe he was impressed that we had the courage to come up and do that. And then so over time, I think he started to pay attention to what we were doing, and we covered one of his songs at a Farm Aid in 2010 in Milwaukee. Covered a song. We were doing a song called L.A. It's like from a record that kind of didn't come out. Time Fades Away. It was all like, sort of, if you're a diehard fan, you know it. But and he really liked it, and so he came and said something after we played, said we did a good job. And then we just sort of kept in touch as pen pals, and he started to give me some feedback and ideas and over the years. And then one day he invited us into the studio to record, and we did the Monsanto years, which actually aged quite well, I think. Them having been found guilty of a number of different things involving glyphosate specifically. And so that was our first foray into his world, and we ended up going on the road extensively after that. And we still love him. He's our great captain.
So what is it like to play on stage with him?
It's like the fullest expression of our dreams as children. I mean, when I was a kid, I dreamed about playing rock and roll like that on a stage for 80,000 people. I mean, Desert Trip was quite an incredible show, and if I do say so myself, I thought we made quite a statement on that show. A lot of people saw that show and really loved it.
He's this character who always seems a little, never out of control, but on the verge of being out of control. Do you feel that way when you're on stage with him?
Yeah, but I relate to it. We all sort of exhibit a sense of abandon when we're out there. It's what we love about being on stage with Neil, because that's where your rock and roll spirit can really shine.
What about songwriting? Has he influenced you in that way?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in the same way that my father has, we wrote a little bit together, and, he's got great feedback on the music.
And another guy you knew, I don't know if you knew him growing up, but you've talked about him in the past, is Chris Christopherson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another one of the great songwriters of our generation, if not ever. Yeah.
Is he the kind of guy you ever went to and said, I've got this song that was inspired by something you did. Can I play it for you?
Sure. He was really a fan of our music. He is a fan of our music.
Is writing something you do every day, or do you write just when it comes?
I write often, every other day. I mean, it comes in bursts where, like, 1 week I'll write 8 songs or something. I might not write again for a month, but that's how it works.
You never worry it's not going to come back. You always...
No, and at this point I have enough material for 5 records before I have to write another song. So it's actually kind of like, it's kind of annoying because I have all this material and I don't know, when it's going to come out, and sometimes you write something and you want it to come out right away because it's how you're feeling at that moment. But like in the case of Perennial Bloom, which is a song from our record that's sort of been on the radio a lot, and it's that song was written May of 2020, and there's a line there. This was like right when the pandemic had hit, but the summer was supposed to be when, the virus maybe would go away because of the heat, and we were feeling very hopeful, and it was like summer's healing coming soon, and someone beside me actually smiled without a mask, and it was more of a metaphor for someone smiling without, the metaphorical masks of being themselves. And yet that song didn't get released until a year later, that same time in May of this year, and the same thing applied. And so it was almost like it was meant to come out a year later and not at that time, because we had a lot more hope for the summer this year than we did back then even. So it was interesting how songs can maybe be written and not be meant to put out until later, which is I'm being forced to accept that.
Listen, thank you so much. It has been just fabulous talking to you.
Yeah, it has. Thank you.
Thanks to Lukas Nelson for playing a couple of songs off his new album and sharing his story with Bruce. You can check out all our favorite Lukas Nelson and Promise of the Real songs at brokenrecordpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced with help from Leah Rose, Jason Gambrell, Martin Gonzalez, Eric Sandler, and Jennifer Sanchez, with engineering help from Nick Chafee. Our executive producer is Mia LaBelle. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.